Board of Education to order. First up under general business is verification. The meeting was properly posted.
Yes, it
Michelle?
was.
Yes, it was. Excellent. Next up is opportunity for public comment. Has anyone signed up? Okay, moving on to our action items. First up is motion to approve minutes for our last meeting as presented. Looking for a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wad.
I second.
Second, Mrs. Voigt. Any comment on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 5-0. Moving on to policy 5113, open enrollment program. This is for approval, I'm assuming? Yep. Any questions? We looked at this last time, didn't we? Yep. Are there any questions for our open enrollment policy? Anybody? I'd be looking for a motion then.
I would, sorry. I would move to approve policy 5113 as presented.
Excellent. Is there a second?
I'll second.
You. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Our next policy up is 5215, missing and absent children. Is there any?
This is a newer policy
Yep.
bringing forward, so we can have discussion and possible action. Mark is also here to chime in on this policy. But this policy is revised to have clarity and consistency with the state and federal programs provided for safety and assistance in the care of missing or absent children. So one of the, I'll bring it up right here, and Mark can speak to it a little bit.
Okay.
We did thumb wrestle on who was gonna,
Right,
sorry.
I lost. So primarily, if you take a look at the fourth paragraph, it says, "District administrator, principals shall permit during the school day the entrance into the school a student lacking records or identification as a student, and shall allow the child to remain in the building office area until law enforcement or social services is notified and takes custody of the child." My understanding of the previous policy was it could have been interpreted to say that any time in a school building. And so this is during the school day when, of course, the school is properly supervised.
Right.
And we would then hand that situation over to law enforcement or to social services.
Okay. Any questions on the changes to policy 5215? Any concerns? No? Looking for a motion for approval? Unless you don't want to approve it?
I so
Mrs.
move.
Voigt, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Wad, last chance for any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 5-0. Thank you. Next up is policy 5530, student use or possession of intoxicants, drugs, or paraphernalia.
Yeah, so once again, we're bringing this policy new to the committee based on recommendations. The policy is updated to reflect the ever-changing and expanding scope of drugs and drug paraphernalia within our system. So Mark will speak a little bit more to the changes. I have them up on the board, and I'll enlarge them as well.
Okay, excellent.
So this is really an effort by Neola to capture kind of what's happening in the marketplace, where with greater frequency, it seems, and intensity, chemists or so-called chemists are finding new and innovative ways to create mood-altering substances. And while the previous policy may have been a bit too specific, this policy is a bit more broad and allows for a wider array of derivatives to be identified as prohibited in schools.
Okay, any
And
questions?
the one on your
Yep.
desk is actually the up-to-date copy, rather than the one in board docs. There are just a few changes, but we did not pull the previous policy, so that's right, this is the one on
Oh,
your
okay.
desk is the one to look at, sorry about that.
All right.
I have a
Yes,
question.
Mr. Wad, definitely.
So Mark,
looking at that second paragraph under item B, this includes delta H, et cetera. Are these the only forms of hemp derivatives that we're concerned about? Are the ones that are listed here, are they the only ones that are on the market?
Well, it does mention all derivatives of hemp, except CBD products is permitted by the school under medication. That would have to be something that would be prescribed by a physician. But in terms of the other derivatives of Delta 8 or Delta 9 or Delta 10, I mean, those are all in the marketplace and in various ways and situations may be considered legal in the marketplace. That doesn't stop them from being prohibited here in a school setting.
Okay. Is there, I'm gonna ask you, and then we can discuss this obviously when the motion comes. Would there be any value in adding this includes but is not limited to? Would that help us with any future products that may emerge that, or do you not care?
I'm not an attorney, so I don't know if that not limited to would be too expansive and therefore open to interpretation versus what they're suggesting in the policy.
So this is language that comes directly from Neola? is that right?
Correct.
Okay. I'm just thinking if we would want to consider that so that we're not having to come back and revise this policy with any new derivative that
Understood.
emerges, but
And for practical purposes, just so you understand, when something is found at a school, for example, our SROs test that for the presence of THC, the active ingredient in marijuana. If it tests positive,
it doesn't matter
it
what.
doesn't matter.
Okay,
It's
got it.
THC. But some would choose to argue that point, saying it's Delta 8, it's Delta 9. For our purposes, that's inconsequential.
Got
It's
it.
tested positive for THC, and therefore it's a violation of our policies.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Would you like to amend the policy?
I don't know if I would or not. I guess I'd be interested if anyone else sees value in that. Or if this is, if the policy in and of itself is fine and this just provides some examples of the types of products that would be included under that first paragraph of B.
Alrighty, so let's look for a motion so we can discuss it according to the law. So I'll be looking for a motion to approve this policy.
So I would move to adopt policy 5530 as presented.
Okay,
Second.
thank you. Alrighty, so I would not be opposed to that, to your addition. If you wish to have amendment to the policy. This policy was, well, given to us in 2018, so 5 years ago. Actually, 17, I think, is the date. So it's been 5 years since it's been updated to have this information. It's up to you, your better judgment. Any other thoughts on adding the language? Betty?
David, can you clarify again what the verbiage is you used?
Yeah, so if we were to look at the second paragraph of item B, it currently says this includes Delta 8 THC, Delta 9 THC, et cetera. I just wondered if there would be any value in including a further qualifier that says this includes but is not limited to. So that, and I don't even know if there is such a thing as a Delta 12, right? But if a Delta 12 emerged or was found, there wouldn't be someone who would try to suggest that since we didn't itemize it and we said that the list includes, I mean, it does say and all other forms that cause psychosis. Maybe that covers us as well. I just wondered if maybe that would provide us some coverage for other products that may emerge or also prevent us from having to come back and potentially revise the policy anytime a new product does emerge. since, as we've heard, we have people who are very active in trying to create new products of this kind in the marketplace.
My sense is that the language, all other forms, kind of covers that. I don't know if we're talking about other derivatives of THC here or not, and if we get too specific, if that's really helping us. I mean, these are more or less examples of what we're currently dealing with. I'm okay with how it is right now. I don't know if, even if you added the word derivatives, other derivatives, I mean, we're still
Yeah.
giving enough, I think, examples to say that this is what we're focused on. Because in general, the policy is fairly broad. It's this one section that is very specific to THC. But, to your point, I appreciate that this is going to continue to change, right?
Mr. Watt?
Yeah, clarifying question perhaps. Do we know why Neola felt it necessary to actually specify these particular products in amended policy? I mean, have there been challenges around a school district's ability to enforce a policy against these particular products? Do we know?
I can try to answer that for you, Mr. Watt. So essentially, what they're trying to do is, in referring back to when we had our meeting with Neola, let me just find it here. It says, schools are able to prohibit these substances, and this language is intended to provide an expansive definition to cover current versions and not yet known future versions. So I think, it's often, like Mr. McCaffrey's point, 5 years old. Some things, and to your point, have continued to evolve. So adding some pieces, but then also adding the language that you mentioned, all derivatives of hemp, all other forms that cause psychosis in all forms of delivery. So I think that gives us quite a bit of flexibility.
Okay.
In terms of interpreting the policy. And sometimes these policies are, there are several, there's some statutory references, there's the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act, and then there's some federal guidance on the bottom of the policy as well. So sometimes we're in better shape if we leave it
Yeah.
as it is to ensure we don't,
Understood.
I don't know what the word would be, contradict in any way.
I'm fine leaving it as is. It was-
Okay, excellent. Any other further discussion? Ms. Kangs?
I just want to mention too, I agree with Mr. Zenobia about the line that it says all other forms that cause psychosis. I'm comfortable having that in there because I feel that would, allow for expansion down the road if needed. I think just having that in there, I'm comfortable with that. I had a question though. With the essential oils, that one kind of surprised me because I know that there are some parents that are a little bit more holistic and treatment. For example, smelling peppermint is a known agent to help calm stomach, upset. I guess I'm wondering, basically, then that means students are not allowed to bring that, but that would be something that a parent could bring if the student needed that, if they had a stomachache at school or vice versa. I mean, I'm really curious about that and how that ended up coming into the picture.
Well, essential oils oftentimes can look like THC in the way in which it's packaged and held, which, that can cause investigative issues in a school where it could take a significant amount of time. Also, and I don't know if this is specifically in board policy, but I have worked in previous districts where things such as essential oils that have a strong odor and may be helpful to some, but may cause allergic reactions in others, are discouraged just as a matter of practice. We wouldn't want someone utilizing essential oils in a classroom, for example, because that could aggravate someone's allergies. So, yeah, it's not specific to this policy, but just in general.
Okay, any other further discussion? Alrighty, the motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 5-0. Excellent. Moving on. That concludes our action items for the evening. Next up is discussion information items. First up is the role of school social workers.
So as everyone gets settled, I'll just kind of recapture kind of where we're at with this presentation and report tonight. This is the first of few that we are bringing to you titled The Role of. We first did school psychologists and now social workers. In the future, we'll be bringing other staff for you just to understand and know them a little bit more, but also know their role. Because oftentimes we speak about student services staff, but we oftentimes don't go into details. So this is just a nice opportunity to hear more about each of the roles within student services.
Excellent. Welcome.
All right. Sure. So while we're putting up the presentation, my name is Kathy Callahan. I'm the school social worker at Waukesha West, Bethesda, and then I'm also on call for Rose Glen.
I am Mary Green. I am the Student Attendance and Engagement Specialist last year and this year at South, which is a position that ends this year. It was grant funded by United Way. Previous to that, I also worked at Whittier and at Higher for the last 8 years, so.
You know who Mark is. So we're really happy to be here tonight to share how we support the whole district and what we do for the whole school. What does a school social worker do? It's hard to kind of encapsulate what we do, but I think one of the main themes is we help students and families overcome barriers because we want to help students be the most successful they can be inside and outside of school, as well as families, but we also connect. So we do a lot of connections with outside agencies, getting people connected to the resources that we have. We are lucky to live in a community that has a lot of nonprofits and other agencies that really are there to help families. So we do a lot of connecting for families. So what kind of training we receive? In the state of Wisconsin, in order to be a school social worker, you have to have a master's in social work. And we get the same training as clinical therapists. We do an additional work in school settings as well. So that's kind of where we go. As far as student services staff, we have the most intensive mental health training out of any of the different fields. And we all come, in Waukesha, we have all come from different backgrounds. Some of us, like I worked in clinical before I came into schools. Some other of us have worked in the county system, have worked in adoption, sexual assault crisis. So we come with a variety of different experiences, and I think that makes our team even stronger because we can consult with each other and learn from each other. It's been a wonderful experience. As you can see, we have the mission, because everything should come back to the district mission as far as what we're doing. And like I said, we're helping families and students overcome those barriers. We're also helping with those soft skills that employers are looking for. We're helping kids to understand, how do you develop conflict resolution? How do I recognize how I'm feeling inside so I can self-regulate and so I can be my best self on the job? There's so many different aspects to that, but that's one of the areas that we're looking at. Another piece that we look at is attendance. Right now, Waukesha School District is at a 94.5% attendance rate, and that is a little bit of an improvement over the last couple of years. And we do a lot with partnering with families and parents to try and help overcome the barriers. Why are your kids not coming to school? How can we help? What can we do? Because if the students are in school, they're going to be more successful, and then we're going to be in a better position. So we do as much of that as we possibly can. So I talked about reducing barriers. What I'm talking about is at the basic level, we have families that have needs, things like connecting them with resources for clothes, school supplies, holiday gifts, dental, eye care, just basic needs, because when a family is doing better, the students are going to do better. So that's what we're really trying to partner with. The other thing is if we have a parent that comes to us and is looking for a need that we aren't aware of, we're going to find a resource for them. And that's nice because then we build our knowledge base, and then we know there's going to be another family that needs that resource down the line. So, couple of data points just to highlight. We are at a 37% rate for students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. I think there's no question there is a level of need in our community, and we definitely assist with getting those families what they need. Another group that I think is one of our most fragile groups is our students who are experiencing homelessness. Currently, we have 185 students in that position. We do a lot of work to wrap around those families because we want those students to have their basic needs met. We also want them to feel safe in school so that they can, come and not have to worry about all the other things outside of school. So we do a lot of work with them.
I think one of the interesting things too about the 37% are qualifying for free and reduced lunch. Some of that, those numbers are higher at different buildings. So that's an important thing to know, that Waukesha is not just all over the place. Like there are some places that there's pockets, there's some places where there's pockets of higher poverty than there are in other schools, so. This next part really talks about how school social workers support students. In addition to the mental health support that Kathy mentioned, those coping skills, the building strong connections with kids and with families. I was just telling Diane Voigt before we started that going from Whittier and higher, now being at South, like the ability to really have those connections with students. They recognize me, not all of them, but a lot of them recognize me, and those families have a level of comfort that if they knew me in elementary school, it really has helped at the high school. Last year, I had an attendance conference with the 9th grader, and the mom said to me, Mary, once we found out we'd be meeting with you, we decided we had to come. So it was because of that familiarity that they were like, okay, I can problem solve and talk to somebody because this person is not going to judge me, that they're here to problem solve. We do a lot of things with managing crises. So if there's a crisis that happened, and unfortunately Waukesha has had that in the last 2 years, guess who's called? It's student services who are called, and social workers are part of that team to figure out how to manage that crisis, community crisis, school crisis, death of student, death of teacher, whatever it might be. We're called to problem solve and figure out how to do that and support people. Assessing students of suicide or self-harm, certainly that does happen some at the elementary level, but certainly as you're moving up to high school, that Kathy and I both have. We're doing a fair amount of that. Of course, 1:30 on the Friday before spring break, we have a Peers for Peers student that brings in a friend that was suicidal. So it's like, that's what I did on my Friday before winter break, is kind of do that assessment. And then today I talked with her again in follow-up. We're really a liaison with mental health facilities. We do a lot of work with Care Solace. We're referring families. We're checking up on families. How did the care go? Do you have something? And then being able to facilitate some small groups. Sometimes you see that more at the elementary level, but really, if there's anger issues, if there's just regulation issues, if there's friendship kind of issues, whatever those things are, we do facilitate small groups too. In addition to students, we also support families. So special education, conducting social histories, trying to get a really good background to know what's gone on with this student so that we can be prepared to help what we should do in the future at school. Reducing those barriers to increase attendance. Kathy had mentioned those before. In my position at South since last year, the 9th grade attendance went from 76% the year before to last year was 92%. So just being able to develop relationships, work with kids, be able to recognize that transition from 8th to 9th grade was important, really, really helped. The other statistic for the end of last year is 9th graders who failed courses was 8% better than it had been. They were failing less courses last year than they had previously. So that, I think, goes along with the mission too, in terms of we want to help kids be career ready, college ready. We want them to pass classes and be able to graduate. So investing in students and the connections that we have with students, I think, is important too. And then how we also support staff. For the last number of years, I think the last year or two we didn't do it, but we have the student service staff, many of which are social workers, have prepared a trauma presentation. So this year, We had 4 45-minute presentations on trauma for staff. Now, obviously, this is like what we do and we know it and we can say it in our sleep. That is not the same for teachers. But it's really valuable information for teachers about trauma, about what it does to the brain, about how to interact with students or talk to students or families to become more sensitive about those things. So that is one thing that social workers have done to be a part of helping out staff in the district as well. We do a lot of consultation with staff. Staff may come in, okay, Mary, here's this student, like I'm having issues with this. So we consult with staff, with teachers, what are things that they maybe can do, what are things going on, intervene with families to be able to help what's going on in the classroom so that that can get better.
So this graphic, it's hard to kind of divide up how we each are used in the district. In total, there's 11 full-time school social workers within the district. However, Mary's position is specifically United Way grant funded, and that funding will end at the end of this school year. So 10 of us are sponsored, if you will, by the district, and then Mary is that grant. And as you can see, some people have full-time positions. I will point out that the Les Paul position, that would be Laura Reichert. She's not just doing Les Paul, she also is our coordinator when it comes to students in the foster care system and students who are experiencing homelessness. So she is not just supporting Les Paul, she's supporting district-wide, and that's quite a large hat that she's got. Most of us have split responsibilities. Like I said, I'm at West and Bethesda, and then I'm also on call for Rose Glen. And that's pretty typical to have 2 or 3 assignments per each of us throughout the district. So, and then if you could go to the next one, Mark. And then that is our lovely group, and I wanted to acknowledge that Kelly Bratz came to support us, so she's in the audience tonight. And between us all, we have 100 years of experience in the school district of Waukesha, which I think it's a pretty good number for us, so. But we wanted to open it up for any questions that you might have for us.
Does anybody have any questions? Mrs. White?
Could you explain a little bit more about the grant that was available through United Way and how that position, I guess, became eligible for funding?
Want to do that?
It precedes me in this role, excuse me, but from what I understand, United Way came to the district kind of the post-pandemic era and understood the need for a greater level of student services support. And it was determined that attendance and engagement specialists would be the best way to utilize that funding. And just based on what Mary has said today in terms of, you know, 9th grade attendance and also the average failure rate going down, those are some of the metrics that we've used to demonstrate that that was money well spent.
It was a 2-year grant then?
Yeah.
Years. Last year and then this year.
Is it renewable?
That's to be determined. I have regular conversations with the folks at United Way. We're always, they're great supporters of the district, and we're not shy about asking, so.
The United Way has also supported Empowering Minds, which is an initiative for mental health. Both they're using Waukesha South and then James Madison Academy, I think they're calling themselves, in Milwaukee, 2 different high schools to really focus and work on mental health. So that is something that the United Way is continuing to invest in, so that I'm involved with that at South last year and this year too. So it's definitely something they're thinking about.
Mr. White?
Yeah, so, first of all, thank you for this presentation. As a new board member, this information, and Jen, I want to thank you as well for bringing the various areas forward to help us better understand what you all do and work so hard at to help our students. I want to kind of follow up on Ms. Voigt's question around the United Way grant, and just looking at it a little bit differently. So I think all of us are aware and have heard the increased demand we saw for mental health services and other types of interventions as a result of the pandemic, right? I'm wondering if you can help me just kind of understand what that looks like, what that looked like maybe before the pandemic, what it looked like during and immediately after, and how does it look now? Or workloads, has it been more of like a kind of a roller coaster, or has it maintained its demand and is continuing to increase?
So one of the things is, before tonight's presentation, I looked at the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and I wanted to compare pre-pandemic to post-pandemic to really see what the trends have been. From 2017 to 2021, there was a 12% increase in anxiety, and this is statewide, and this is high schoolers. For depression, I want to say that number was a 7% increase for students having issues around depression. And then for suicidal ideation, it actually was only a 2% jump, which I'm glad to see that was a smaller jump. But one of the things that I noticed from the 2021 survey is 58% of students had said in the last 12 months, they had struggled with one of the following: depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, or self-harm. 58% of high school students in the state of Wisconsin. I've been doing this 20 years, and I will say that the mental health needs, and there has been an increase in what is coming into the buildings. We are not doing therapy in schools, but what we're doing is supporting what they're doing in therapy. So the grounding techniques we might use, the breathing and counting and just doing some other regulation pieces, are things that the kids are learning in their therapy outside of school. We're kind of just coaching them when they're in that moment of having a panic attack so that they can then get on with their day. Because I would much rather spend 10, 15 minutes with a student, get them regulated so that they can go on and go to math versus calling a parent and saying, you have to come pick them up. Because then they're missing out on even more instruction, so.
I think a lot of what we do also is that educational piece. It's not the therapy piece, but it's the educational piece, which kind of parallels some of the therapy stuff. So it's school-related, it's brief, it's solution-focused, it's trying to get a student knowledgeable about something to be able to then move on and cope in a different way. I will say this is my 29th year in schools, my third district, but I can tell you, I had a 1,700 student high school in Sheboygan my first 11 years. We did not deal with mental health in this way. We did not. Like you have the numbers and you looked at it from YRBS, but anecdotally, I can tell you, did we have some?
Sure.
Sure, but definitely not to the degree that we do today.
So if I could follow up on that then, do we have a sense for what it is that's driving this?
That is the million-dollar question.
I assume it probably is.
So I would say it's very multifaceted. Students are connected all the time, social media, like, when I was growing up, we could get away because we didn't have the social media, we didn't have the cell phones. So I think that's one factor. There's a lot more demands on students when they want to get into those very challenging colleges. It was much easier in my generation to get in Madison than it is now. So there's a lot of pressure to perform and be elite in academics, in athletics, to be constantly doing things. And then we also have the pandemic. We all experience the unknown of what is going to happen. And that led to a lot of kids struggling with predictability. They didn't know what to expect, and so then you have that rise of anxiety. So I think there's a lot of different factors going on. So sometimes I have conversations with kids and their parents about, kids don't like it as much, but the parents do, when I say things like, maybe they don't need a TV in their room. Maybe this is, their cell phones should stay in the kitchen so that they can actually get a good night's sleep. So it's just, some education around what is healthy self-care can help, but it's not the total answer.
I think the other thing that's also part of this really is the awareness of mental health in society, the social media and how it just, kids can see it and they hear it all the time. And then the acknowledgement from their parents, I think, is different than what it was a number of years ago too. So I think that's another thing in addition to the things that Kathy mentioned that really is impacting.
So if I could, just
Definitely.
final question along this line. So, given that, right, this dramatic increase in these things that you're seeing, in terms of the mental health needs, and I'm sure other needs that the kids have, within the district that may not even be, mental health focused. How is, I'm trying to think how to ask this. Do you feel as though you're well-staffed, well-positioned to be able to address these things? Do you have what you need? Have the demands increased beyond your team's ability to be able to serve? Are there areas that aren't getting met that maybe have in the past?
Well, I'll just say at South, we have a full-time social worker and we have me. It's a pretty nice combination. We have a high poverty school. Kathy is at West, which has more students than what South does, but she is only there 3 days a week. So,
And that's been a challenge because, you know, I work very closely with administration, with the SRO and with the school counselors and the school psychologists, but when I'm there every other day, it is challenging to build continuity, especially when I'm helping with, you know, it's very common when I'm there in the morning to have a couple of kids coming in very anxious. So, you know, taking the time to settle them down but then when I'm not there on the other days, then the counselors have to try and do that on top of what they're doing. So we are making it work, but we are very stretched thin, so. And we have to prioritize, so
Sure.
other things just unfortunately sometimes have to go along the wayside, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Zenobia?
Yes, on the issue of attendance, so could you give us some examples of how you've been able to, you know, your role and how attendance has increased? Because it seems like, you know, that is one of the biggest factors that go into our students performing better overall. So just from your perspectives of what you see,
sure.
I know a lot of it's around building the relationships that will keep kids coming to school, but maybe a little bit more specific.
I think, and I did a monthly activity summary last year for both Maria D'Amato and for Mark that kind of listed all the different things that I did. I think having somebody focus specifically on the systems in place at the building, and also the systems around attendance and engagement. So having a person who's there that they're not always in flux with students with crises, but that I had time to be able to look at statistics, look at what's happening, research, or look at other attendance-related websites or places that are like, these are some things that should be in place, that I had the time to be able to do some of those things. I also had a building that was ready for it. Like I was a building I had a building that, you know, whatever I said, they were interested in hearing it, and we were able to work on some things. I would say I did things like I created a attendance iceberg. If you've seen the pictures of a anger iceberg that you see angry, and then below the waterline you see all of these emotions, right. So I created an attendance one, and underneath the waterline were all the reasons why attendance was poor. So I'm still kind of adding to that. We created a poster. We have a very talented marketing kind of person who's a student service aide at South, and I just gave her my ideas, and she created a poster. So we had a poster in every single classroom this year that talked about who is good attendance for, and it had a QR code on it, different things just to focus in that every classroom had the same poster. The other thing we did last year is at the end of the ninth grade year, I was focusing on ninth graders last year. We had all the ninth graders fill out a 2-question survey that said, what advice would you give to incoming ninth graders? So we took all of that advice, and on a poster, there are 5 suggestions. And so I gave those posters this year to all of the ninth grade homeroom teachers, and I asked them to please have the conversation with students in their class about it, so that, work hard, make friends, whatever the 5 things were. So some of those things, being in a position like I was, being new in the building and kind of an additional person, that I was able to do some of those things that you can't do when you're like inundated with suicide ideation all the time or special education evaluations all the time, so.
And the social workers do an outstanding job of kind of walking that fine line with attendance, because it would be easy to go, well, you're habitually truant, and that's a problem, and you need to fix that. But that oftentimes will push students and families away. So what social workers are doing is attempting to bring those families and those students into the fold, even going so far, and Mary's not the only one, but going and picking kids up in the morning and bringing them to school, to help them build that habit of learning, of coming, of feeling appreciated in the morning, of feeling like they're in a place where
Somebody
they.
notices.
Yeah, someone notices, someone cares. Those are things that the social workers do pretty regularly, in a way to try to capture those kids and keep them where they need to be.
And if, even at the elementary level, it's about building the confidence of parents, because some of our parents didn't have good experiences themselves in education. And so, we now are able to text, which is a wonderful thing. But I have a list of parents that I'll text and just say, hey, I noticed Johnny's not here today. Is everything okay? And they're more willing to talk about what's going on versus I'm not sitting there judging them. So even if they can bring Johnny in an hour late, I'll take it, because that's progress. Because before, they would just stay home all day. So if we can just keep building that connection and keep building the system to, engage, it really does help. I've seen some success stories in the elementary level where we have kids in 5th grade that when they were in 1st grade, they were not coming. So there's improvement, and that's what we want to see.
Other question I had was on the students that are experiencing, it says here, experiencing or identified as homeless. So is this number here, this 185 to date, is that in addition to what may have already been identified, or is that the current number of what we think?
This year, every year, we basically start at 0.
Okay.
And so I think we've had about 300 students the last number of years. So that's kind of where it was, I think, in December.
Yeah, they have to requalify each year. So
Okay.
Laura Reichert at Les Paul, that's part of her role, is she talks with families and determines their situation, and then works to wrap support around them as needed.
Sure.
Things like transportation.
A couple years ago, I heard that number was close to 400, and I don't know if that was accurate then, but that number has, maybe never that high, okay. But that's maybe come down a little bit then in the last couple years from what you've seen?
We're
or-
halfway through the year.
Okay.
So I would compare end-of-year numbers, probably, I guess 300 is the number that's kind of in my mind from the
Okay.
last couple of years, but that could be something we get
Sure.
from Laura too, so.
Okay.
And I think the other thing, like the word homeless, for the most part, we don't have kids on the street. Occasionally, I have kids and families sleeping in cars. Occasionally, I've had kids with families in campgrounds. Most of them are they're in a shelter, or they're doubled up living with somebody else. It's a 2-bedroom, and there's 10 people living there. Obviously, that's a tough situation to be able to learn the next day when you've got 10 people and you're sleeping on the floor and don't have a pillow, and you're lucky you have a blanket, and so.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? No? All righty. Excellent presentation. It's always good to hear from.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us, we appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. Up next is the open enrollment projections for 2024, 2025.
So before we jump right into the enrollment projections, I just wanted to take a step back and share that earlier tonight, we talked about the policy for open enrollment program. So this is all connected. In that policy number 5113, there was section A, which was the annual space determination. So like every other year, this is something that's done, is we look at our seats available and we project forward to next school year to determine how many open enrollment seats we would have available. I would say that one of the changes this year is that we've brought that, this subject matter as far as the open annual space determination conversation here to this committee. In the past, it was at Finance and Facility. And we're not sure why, but we just thought that since we're talking about open enrollment policy and other things, open enrollment in and out, that we would just, bring them together tonight. So that's one of the changes, and if it goes well, we can continue with that moving forward. I do also want to say that these are projections that are discussed for those wanting to come into the district. So this is different than any students who are open enrolling out of the district, and this is also different than school choice, which is within the district. Sometimes we get all those things confused. Even I had to sit down and say, okay, which part? It's always like just this one little sliver. So what I have projected up, and I can share them larger. But the state requires us to declare a number of open seats at each grade level. And so we have the chart below looking at our current students and multiple factors that go into that. So here, I'll just take the first line. You'll see that in monolingual and 4K, we have 45 seats. What that means is that's 45 seats throughout the district. It doesn't mean at this specific site. Furthermore, like if you look down the row at grade 2, we have 6 seats. Again, if someone were to open enroll into the district, not every school has 6 seats. We are estimated to have 6 seats throughout the whole district. And so if they want a specific school, we'd have to then look and see if there's availability. So just want to make that clarification. In the chart here, though, you will see that we have numbers for each of the grade levels for monolingual and dual language. You see that they are different. Same applies for the dual language pieces. For Waukesha STEM, which is one of the charter schools, sometimes there's a lottery needed, so those are not factored in here. You'll see that some grade levels have 0 open seats that we are projecting, but eAchieve has unlimited. In the area of special education, this is a high demand area, lots that we've talked about, but looking at our student population, our staffing, we really at this time do not have any open enrollment seats or capacity for additional students with IEPs. So we are projecting to have 0 seats at each of the grade levels. In looking back from previous presentations, the numbers aren't dramatically different than previous years. Nothing like that stood out to me as far as dramatic or shocking.
Any questions related to the open enrollment numbers? Mr. Watt?
Thank you for bringing this information to us. I just have a few questions to help my understanding. So I'm going to make the assumption here that the primary driver of the number of open seats is based upon the staff available and what we target for pupil to teacher ratio. Is that true, or am I off base on that?
That is part of it. We never want to open, I mean, typically what we're trying to do is like if there's a class of, let's say, 18, and our class limit is 23, we don't want to go over where we do have to bring in additional staff.
Yeah, right.
And that's where these seats are throughout the whole district, not specific to each school.
So I have to say I was a little surprised to see the number of grade levels in which we say there are 0 open seats, and I'm assuming that's primarily a staffing enrollment-driven calculation or projection. Is that true?
And part of rolling up the student population now and knowing, especially with the change from elementary to middle school, and anticipating what middle school they go to,
Right.
taking in those into consideration.
When we compute these numbers, do we take into account what our estimates are for the number of students that will open and roll out? Or do we assume that whatever our enrollment numbers are projected to be next year, we don't take into account what historically we're seeing in terms of our open enrollment out?
For this projection, we can always, like, if we have 0 here, we can always take more.
Oh, you can?
Yeah, but if we put down, if we're projecting 20,
You have to take?
we have to take
Okay.
20. And so that's where there's going to be some fluctuation. And so you are always better to err on, like, if we
So-
don't have any truly,
I got it. So I think, so in other words, by indicating 0, that gives you the flexibility of being able to take an open enrollment student in who applies, but you're not required to, if it will create some other issue around staffing or there's or classroom space or something. Is that basically right?
absolutely.
Okay.
In addition, we have to also factor in movement throughout the
Sure.
system and move in to the district.
Sure.
So we often see that in kindergarten, where at the
Yeah.
last minute, we're running to get another kindergarten teacher because all of a sudden, 2 families, just moved in.
Right.
So that also happens at other grade levels, and so that again is an unknown number that we still have to try and factor in.
So a number of 0 doesn't mean that we can't accept somebody that applies. So let's say we get a application for somebody at Meadowbrook for 4th grade, right?
It would be for the district at that grade level.
Right.
And then we would put them on a wait list and see, oftentimes.
Where there might be space.
Yep.
Got it.
And then we kind of wait through August and see, like, do we have 90% of our families who have re-enrolled, and everyone accounted for? Sometimes it does get down to the wire. That enrollment office is very busy right before school, but it is a little guessing game with so many different factors that are always moving.
And do parents, when they're open enrolling in, do they typically identify the school that they are interested in open enrolling into, or are they more interested in just the district as a whole?
They don't right now, to my knowledge, they don't identify the reason.
No, not a reason, but do they identify the school that they would prefer?
Yes, because of funding that's associated with it.
Yeah, okay.
I just had
Can
a
I-
question.
Yep.
Yeah, I had a question. So just so I'm understanding this, so I'm a parent of a 2nd grader, I live out of the district, and I want my student to go to Hawthorne for 2nd grade. If there's no openings there, though, I'm out of luck. I could go somewhere else, that has an opening, but I can't choose the school. It's wherever there's room, right?
Correct. It starts with opening and rolling into the district and then looking at that. And then what may happen, like I said earlier, is a family may move. Like if you're on the waiting list for Hawthorne and you wait and all of a sudden you just kind of see where the numbers fall, but have a backup plan. Oftentimes that's what families do. But you're put on a waiting list, and there's lots of conversations. We want to work with families and get families at a school that they want to be a part of for whatever reason. But sometimes it does take a little time and a little finagling and just watching the numbers, really.
Sure, so if I'm a parent of 4th through 8th grader, I can plan to be on a waiting list at this point and hope something may open. Okay, great. Thanks.
And it may, like.
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, the state will hold us to that number that we put in that box. So. Any other questions? Mr.
Yeah,
White?
just one more follow-up. Do we keep metrics, or do we keep track of how many people apply to open enroll into the district and how many are accommodated? Do we know, like, how many typically families want to open enroll?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but.
Yeah, I mean, we,
I know there's data that we can collect.
that we could present, but we don't have that tonight.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just curious if it was available. I'd like to see it at some point, maybe the next time we're talking about open enrollment or we have a discussion around it. That might be interesting information to see.
I do know, like I said, we try and work with all the families, and our eAchieve is a nice solution for a lot of families
Right.
that aren't in the district, so.
Thank you.
Any other questions? The one question that I have is on the special ed, and I don't really know, we used to have the deaf and hard of hearing. Is that still at Lowell?
Yeah, we do
Okay.
have some, but we've had trouble staffing.
Right, but we still serve as the place
We do
for area
provide,
districts, right? 'Cause
we do
used-
provide the districts. Some
Yep.
other districts have grown to grow their
Oh,
own
they have,
staff.
okay, okay,
And also it depends on severity sometimes.
right, okay.
But we have had an opening, I mean, it's just a hard to fill position.
For the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So we still have, are we still accepting those? Because I know that we had an agreement with Elmbrook for a long time where their deaf and hard of hearing students came to us and we sent a group of students with special, needs to them that they specialize in. Are we still doing that? And where would that be in this mix?
I'd have to look at that. That'd be for just our special education numbers and transfers. But we can look at that and bring that
Just wondering
back.
if it's still, I mean, it used to be a really big thing in Waukesha at Lowell.
Yes.
It was like
We were
a
just talking about
preeminent
it, actually.
premier program
Yep,
in Waukesha County that
Yep.
we would service those students. Okay.
yep.
All right. Anything else? Any other questions? All righty, excellent. Thank you for that report.
I think we
Alrighty.
actually need approval. Hang on a sec.
Do we need approval here?
I,
Not
Oh,
here, because it's not,
sorry.
yeah,
Thanks.
that's,
Sorry.
what does that appear under at the full board? Is that under the general business?
In the past, it was always just reviewed as a discussion item at F&F. Now
Yes.
here at Student Services, it'll appear as an action item at the full board next week.
Under
We just
general-
have to determine if we want to put it under
Under
Student
general business,
Services,
okay.
move it down to action, or make it a general business.
Okay.
And we can look at how we've done that in the
Yeah,
past.
okay, excellent. All righty. Okay. All right, moving on to other business. Any recommendations for future meetings? Anybody? Anybody? If you do, email Jen and myself, and we will definitely get it on the agenda. And that concludes our meeting. Thanks for attending.